He rode across TV screens for years as the perfect hero. In 1952, Clayton Moore suddenly stopped being on the show. No one knew the reason. Did it cost money? Was it in charge? The substitute actor did a terrible job. Moore never talked about what happened when he got back. In the 1980s, a shocking case tried to take away his mask for good. The real man who played the Lone Ranger fought much worse fights than any bad guy on the show. Mike Moore was born in Chicago on September 14, 1914. He was the third boy, and the youngest. Charles, his dad, was a real estate agent. Even during the Great Depression, the family had enough money to live on. It was terrible for many families, but the Moores had a maid who lived with them and a vacation place in Canada. Jack was safe and secure, which was rare for kids his age. He was free to think and explore, but Jack didn't want to become a doctor like his father wanted him to. Instead, he was drawn to performance and physical tasks. He was different even when he was a child. He was an acrobat in a show by the time he was 12. He didn't just hang out, he worked out hard. While other kids played and swam during summer trips to Canada, Jack did flips and hung from trees like a dancer. It worked out. He was in a professional trapeze group called the Flying Bears by the time he was 19. It wasn't just a show for him. He had to catch other people in the air because he was the catcher. He loved it, even though it was dangerous and hard. The Chicago World's Fair started that same year in 1934. A lot of people came to see what the future held, and Jack Moore was there, acting high above them. He put on shows every day, and the strength and accuracy of his moves amazed the crowds. It was more than just fun. It was being exposed. He became known to some people. They saw more in him than just his flips. They saw a friendly face and a lot of charm. That opened up a new world for him. Modeling. A company called John Robert Powers signed Moore in New York. It was very important. It was at that time that Powers was one of the best modeling companies. Moore was a great fit because he was tall, had a strong chin and bright eyes. His picture was in ads, catalogs and papers until the late 1930s. He looked like the perfect American. He made money and made links in the business by modeling. I felt like something was still missing. The photos were quiet. Jack was ready to go. He did something risky in 1938. He went to Hollywood. After leaving New York, he didn't have a big job lined up. All he had was hope and a resume, and how good he is at sports. He did any part he could get in those early years, from small jobs to stunt work. But while other people complained, Moore thought of it as practice. He watched how actresses said their lines. He learned how to make cameras move. He knew how to use lighting, timing, and personality. He got better over time. Then 1940 came along. There was a manager named Edward Small who stepped in. His good looks and skills made him like Jack, but his name was too simple for him. Jack changed his name to Clayton Moore. It wasn't just about image when they changed their name. It was a change. Clayton Moore thought he was meant to be on TV or in movies. It changed who he was, and he was happy with that change. Clay got married to Mary Frances that same year. Mary's mother joined them on the flight to Las Vegas for the wedding. A very exciting Hollywood wedding. It didn't last though. After less than 2 years they got a divorce. They had different things going on in their lives. After that, she was in a science fiction show. He was almost through. Republic Studios hired Clayton to be in Perils of Neoka in 1942. It went over well. He played the part of Dr. Larry Grayson, a figure who rode horses, fought bad guys, climbed walls, and even did brain surgery in caves. Even though it was too much, Clayton made it seem real. His face told me he was sincere. The tricks were done by his body. It was a lot of money back then. $175,010 to make that serial. It paid off though. Moore showed that he was a star, and Republic saw him right away as their next big serial hero. Even bigger than Buster Crabbe. Moore put his career on hold to fight in World War II. Just as it was taking off, Moore joined the U.S. Army Air Forces that same year, because he hurt his knee as a trapeze worker. He wasn't sent overseas, but he still did a lot to help win the war. He was sent to Kingman, Arizona, after training in Texas. There he used his show business knowledge to plan and put together entertainment for the troops. A lot of the soldiers knew him from movies, and made fun of his parts, but they still stood up for him. After that, He worked with the first motion picture unit, which made training movies like Target and Invisible to help American pilots get ready for battle. He even spent some time at the base of the unit in Culver City, California. Moore said that his work wasn't very busy, but he was proud of what he did. He was released from the Army with honor in July 1945. During his time in Arizona, something much more personal also took place. Moore asked his girlfriend, model Sally Allen, to marry him over the phone while he was at military camp. Her answer was yes right away. To be with him, she even moved out to the middle of the desert. In the 1940s, that kind of quick love story during the war was typical, but theirs lasted. Up until Sally's death in 1986, they were married for 43 years. She didn't just back Moore, she helped boost mood at the base by often taking part in the shows he put together. Over time, Moore's love for Sally made people who worked with him think of how loyal he was as the Lone Ranger. Moore didn't waste any time after the war. As soon as he got back into movies, he went straight for westerns. He worked non-stop from 1946 to 1947. Big names like Roy Rogers and Gene Autry got to know him, and they liked the way he wrote. Moore was in a number of movies, including 5 Gene Autry productions, The Cowboy and the Indians, and Riders of the Whistling Pines in 1949, Sons of New Mexico in 1950, and both Barbed Wire and Night Stage to Galveston in 1952. He learned a lot from these, especially working with big stars. In the 1946 movie The Crimson Ghost, he played a hooded hero without getting credit for it. This was an early sign of things to come. He was also a guest star on TV shows like The Gene Autry Show and The Range Rider. The tough but kind persona that would later define him was shaped by these parts. Then he got the part that really showed how versatile he was. Played Jesse James in the 1947 movie, Jesse James Rides Again. It took less than a month to make, and cost $180,497. Moore's Jesse wasn't just a bad guy. He tried to be a good person. People were hooked. He had a dangerous edge that made the character feel real. He was focused and quick on the draw. Republic Pictures immediately ordered a second movie because of how well the first one did. Moore came back for Adventures of Frank and Jesse James in April 1948. That one was shot even faster, in just 21 days, and cost $149,985 to make. The tricks, they were exciting, and Tom Steele wrote a lot of them. He was in charge of the most dangerous scenes. Most Republic serials had 15 chapters, so these two with only 13 chapters stood out, but they worked. Moore was able to lead a team and play a hero with many sides. The man behind the hit radio show, George W. Trendle, was looking for someone to bring his masked hero to TV in 1949. He wasn't willing to hire just anyone. He required someone who seemed moved and spoke like justice. When Clayton Moore walked into the interview, he told Mr. Trendle, "I am the Lone Ranger. Don't think that faith was empty." Moore had already done a great job in Ghost of Zorro, and his background in sports made him a great fit for the part. By the time he was 20, he had already worked as a trapeze artist in Chicago and done shows at the Century of Progress Expo. Wasn't acting when the first show aired on ABC on September 15, 1949. He was the Lone Ranger. But a strange thing happened. Jones didn't like Moore's voice, even though it was deep and rich. Moore had to sound just like the person on the radio, Brace Beamer. Moore wasn't upset. He worked hard with a vocal teacher and practiced until he could match every tone and rhythm. However, Trendle wasn't happy. In 1950, he told producers that Moore's sound was getting too different from Beamer's, and he even said he would replace Moore if Moore didn't change. Moore didn't give up though. He completely changed his voice, becoming the version that fans had loved for years in both audio and video. As a result, his voice became famous, and he made the change from radio to TV seem natural. There was more than one man on the show. The Lone Ranger was a big hit when it came out on TV. Ratings were huge. Number 7 from 1950 to 1951. From 1951 to 1952, number 18, to number 29 from 1952 to 1953. But what made it really special was how Moore and Jay Silverheels worked together. Silverheels, a real Native American actor, played Tonto. This was a big change from the past, when white actors usually wore makeup to play these kinds of parts. Tonto's English was still bad, but Silverheels made him look good. Fans took notice. It was said that the Ranger and Tonto were not boss and slave, they were on the same level. People thought that idea was important, but things weren't really fair behind the scenes. Silverheels made $150 a week, and an extra $2,500 in 1951. He made $650 a week by 1954, but he still wanted to make more. No matter what, the bond between them made the show unique, and it was just what the world needed. A lot of people in America had TVs, and they all gathered to watch the man in the mask and his friend ride into action. Moore was more than just good looking, he went through it. He taught Silver, the horse, on his own. He did his own moves on screen, like galloping, jumping, and wrestling, episode after episode. Moore would show off his skills in public, even after many years had passed. Fans were thrilled, as he spun his Colt .45s. He was still in good shape, fast, and the Lone Ranger at age 71. He always told his fans that the Ranger only shot to stop, never to kill. That was in the code, and Moore thought it was true. Then in 1952, something terrible happened. Moore was removed out of the blue. John Hart took over. The show kept going, but something wasn't right. Moore didn't know the reason. He wrote in his book that he never asked. Some said it had to do with a contract disagreement. Some people, like his daughter, thought he knew about how much money Lone Ranger Goods was making, and might have asked for a cut, but she also didn't think he would ask for money. Trendle, on the other hand, thought it didn't matter who played the role, the mask was all that people needed. He was wrong, stayed busy with work during that year off. He stopped going by Clayton, and became Clay Moore. He played a bad guy named Graber, in Radar Men from the Moon. Because it was a low-budget serial, Moore broke the lead actor's nose by mistake during a fight scene. He was also in Jungle Drums of Africa, with the first Lois Lane, Phyllis Coates. These jobs paid the rent, but none of them were as exciting or famous as being the Lone Ranger. It was 1953 before Trendle had had enough. Deep down he didn't like any of the 52 shows he watched. His voice was flat, and his heart was racing. He slouched in the chair. Fans didn't like him, and the show was losing steam. Moore got a new agent. It was the same person who worked with Silverheels. Talks began to happen. Moore didn't just come back, he came back with more money. Hart was quietly fired without being told why or being argued with. Moore just put on the mask again, and the show went on as planned. After that, Moore was in 169 of the show's 221 episodes. When he came back, so did the bond between him and Silverheels. The episodes were fine. Once more, Moore didn't stop after the show finished on June 6, 1957. He went out in public as the Lone Ranger for the next 40 years. It was ads he filmed. He went on talk shows. The character went everywhere with him. He would even say the Lone Ranger's creed at events. In 1979, the court tried to tell him he couldn't wear the mask. Moore fought back though, and was able to keep playing the part he loved. Behind the scenes, things changed too. Jack Rather, a businessman, pushed for the character's rights in 1954. He didn't just bring Moore back, he also paid for the last season to be filmed in color. Even though ABC was still showing it in black and white, he thought the show would do well in the future. Instead, Rather took it to the movies. The next two movies were The Lone Ranger 1956, which made $1.55 million in the US, and The Lone Ranger and the Lost City of Gold 1958, which was shot in Eastman color. Moore and Silverheels were in both, and they both became cult favorites. Even after The Lone Ranger finished, Clayton Moore was still well known. In the 1960s and 1970s, he did ads with the character to keep it alive. I remember one for Jano's Pizza Rolls from 1972 very well. Even his old co-star Jay Silverheels came back for it. They played off of the show's famous line, "Who was that masked man?" while dressed up. This time the riddle was about who gave them pizza rolls the first time. People really liked it, even though it was strange. Moore did ads for Aquavelva as well, and people heard his deep familiar voice right away. He never thought of these ads as work. He would only play parts that made the Lone Ranger look like a strong hero. Moore didn't just wear the mask for fun, it had meaning.
Behind the scenes though, things weren't going so well for him. Moore got married again in August 1986, only 6 months after the death of his wife of 43 years. Connie Crivello was her name, and she had been Sally's nurse. That made some people feel bad. The couple split up. It was over by 1989. Still in October 1986, the couple did something brave that made the news. On a California road, they helped a driver who was hurt. Moore jumped in to help even though he was in his 70s at the time, kind of like the part he played. Things got tough after the breakup. Moore was getting older, having a hard time figuring out who he was, and in the middle of a very tough court case. In August 1979, there was a very shocking case. The company that owned the rights to the Lone Ranger character got a court order telling Moore he couldn't wear the mask in public. Moore was 65 years old. He had been the Lone Ranger in 221 episodes and many other roles for almost 30 years. However, Ruther's business was making plans for a new Lone Ranger movie. They were afraid that Moore's continued presence would make things harder for everyone and ruin their $18 million investment. Moore went to court wearing a full cowboy dress, a white hat, and a mask. He was told to take off his hat by the judge. Moore left instead in a quiet way. He cared too much about the mask. That case was more than just the law. It was very close to home. Vern Foster, the judge, said Moore could no longer wear the mask or call himself the Lone Ranger in public. It was a terrible blow. The ruling was based on an old part of Moore's contract and a case from the past where Bela Lugosi's son failed to protect the rights to his father's Dracula film. Ruther's lawyer was mean to Moore during the case and said he was crazy and too old to be the Lone Ranger. In the end, Moore said it felt like getting hit in the face. The judge even said he felt sorry for Moore, but that the law was clear. It was the end of a story that began in 1949. Moore didn't give up though. He joined forces with Foster Grant Sunglasses in 1980. He would wear sunglasses instead of the mask, if he couldn't. He was in their Who's Behind Those Foster Grants ad with Woody Allen, Raquel Welch, and other famous people, but he didn't have on the mask in the ads. He still wore the white hat, blue shirt, and red scarf. When kids saw those ads, they began to think of the man in sunglasses as the Lone Ranger. It was a smart move. Moore stayed in the news from 1980 to 1984 without breaking the court's rules. The glasses turned into a new type of sign. Then there was the 1981 movie, The Legend of the Lone Ranger. It went off. The movie that cost $18 million only made $12 million, so it lost $6 million. Clinton Spilsbury, the lead actor, was terrible. He had the right look, but he couldn't act. His words were so bad that James Keach's voice was used instead of his the whole time. Some people found out, even though they tried to keep it a secret. Gene Siskel made fun of the choice by saying that who played him would be the only question people would ever ask. The Lone Ranger wasn't even dressed up until almost an hour into the movie. It was done slowly and badly. 2 Razzie Awards were given to Spilsbury for worst acting. That was the end of his career. William A. Fraker, who directed it, never made another movie either. Clayton Moore's fight wasn't just over a mask. It had to do with character, history, and something much more important. He finally got to wear the mask again in September 1984, after 5 long years of court battle. That man had been the Lone Ranger since 1949. The case had been going on since 1979, and Jack Ruther, who owned the character's rights, was in charge of it. But on September 20th, Ruther dropped the case out of the blue. After only a few weeks, on November 4th, he died of cancer. Some people thought that Ruther changed his mind when he knew he was going to die. Moore's agent got the letter that stopped everything on October 17, 1984. Jack's wife, Bonita Granville Ruther, wrote that Clayton Moore could wear the Lone Ranger mask again. The fight was over in an instant. Moore had not waited quietly though. Even though he wasn't allowed to wear the mask, he came up with a clever way to keep the image living. Instead, he wore Foster Grant sunglasses that went around his eyes. He was so good that they used him in their ads. People really liked it. He was on the show Real People in 1980. He couldn't even say anything because the cheers were so loud and long. His fans stood by him. Over 1 million people signed the petition. 500,000 letters were sent to him directly. In 1982, 2 years before the case finished, Moore was chosen to be in the Stuntmen's Hall of Fame. It remembered that he started out as a trapeze artist, and gave him the nickname King of the Serials. He then had the event in 1990 that made his place in Western history clear. He was made a member of the Hall of Great Western Performers in Oklahoma City on March 15. Among them were John Wayne, Gary Cooper, and other greats. He won the Western Heritage Award that same year. He won the Golden Boot Founders Award in 1998, which honored his life's work in westerns. These awards were given to him because of who he was, not just his talent. Moore often said that writing about him made him a better person. In real life, he followed the Lone Ranger's rules. At every award show, he talked about his old co-star on TV, Tonto, who was played by Jay Shiny Shoes. They had made more than 200 movies and TV shows together. But in 1987, he won one of the most important awards. Moore got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame on June 5, but this wasn't any star. Clay Moore the Lone Ranger was written on it. Before, no other actor had been able to have both names on the same star. No one had ever done it before. He showed up that day dressed as the whole thing. People came with lunchboxes, comic books, and silver toy guns for him to sign. One of the largest crowds ever seen at a Walk of Fame event. His star is still one of the most looked at on Hollywood Boulevard. In 1984, the same year he got his mask back, more people were added to the Western Walk of Fame in Old Town New Hall. Icons like John Wayne and Clint Walker stood next to him. After that, his famous black mask was bought by the Smithsonian in 2004. That was the one he wore when he won the court case. That simple piece of cloth and plastic turned into a sign of fairness. For 44 cents in 2009, the U.S. Postal Service put out a stamp with Moore as the Lone Ranger riding silver. Not many artists have ever gotten that kind of national praise. Moore wrote a book in 1996 called I Was That Masked Man. It was about his life, from getting the part in 1949 to the case that tried to take it all away. He wrote that all he had to do to get the part was tell Mr. Trendle, I am the Lone Ranger. He really meant it. The book talked about how painful it was to lose the right to wear the mask. It felt like getting hit in the face to him. But he also wrote about how people were nice to him, about the letters and support, and how he didn't hold grudges against anyone, even those who tried to stop him. His 1996 book tour was a time to remember the Lone Ranger's creed. All men are equal, and one person can make a difference. Fans in the West loved the book, not just for the stories, but also for how real he seemed. Moore did more than play a hero. He was one. Clayton Moore had both happy and sad times in his personal life. He got married 4 times. That was from 1943 to 1986, when he was married to Sally Allen, and they had a girl named Dawn Angela. He got married again after Sally died, but those marriages didn't last. After that, he married Clarita Petroni when he was 77 years old. In 1992, it was different this time. There was peace. Their life together in his Calabasas home was peaceful and full of love. His fame began to fade, but he had found someone who understood him, which was what he needed. Clarita told everyone what those last days were like after he died. She said that it hurt her to see how much his body had lost. She said through tears, "You wouldn't believe this was once the man who wore the mask." His strong, proud features were no longer there. Even though he was pale and thin, he had always taken care of how he looked. Even when he was 80 years old, he didn't want to be seen without his mask. People should remember the hero, not how weak he was. He did let someone in at the end though. As he lay dying in a hospital bed, he reached out for Clarita's hand. His body wasn't very strong. Even though it was hard for him to breathe, he still reached out. He didn't want to give up life, her or the things that were important to him. That moment said more than any words could. He tried to comfort someone even though he knew he was going to die. Clay Moore did that. That was the Lone Ranger. Moore died of a heart attack at home on December 28, 1999. He was taken to a San Fernando Valley hospital right away, but it was too late. He was 85 years old. It was right after Christmas, and before the new year. The timing seemed to be a sign. A time had passed. He had said that he wanted to wear his white hat when he flew to that big ranch in the sky. He did in a way. He was buried with the things he built still on him. His wife Clarita and daughter Dawn are still alive. The man he left behind was more than that though. One built not only on movies and TV shows, but also on the way he lived. He made 169 episodes of The Lone Ranger. He showed up in a huge number of places, but he also encouraged a lot of people to live with respect, bravery and kindness.